20, Rowan Sykes had $10 in his pocket and nowhere to sleep. He had aged out of foster care 2 years ago. The shelter in Grayling, Michigan had kicked him out for being too old. He had been sleeping in an abandoned car behind the hardware store. So when the county auctioned an old bowling alley for $10, Rowan raised his hand and bought it. He came to sleep in it, but 2 weeks later, when he pried up the maple boards of Lane 3, he found something the man who built the alley in 1962 had cemented into the floor, and it changed his whole life. That was later. First, there was the shelter and the January cold, and the small, careful arithmetic of a life measured in $3 meals. Grayling was a small town in the middle of the lower peninsula of Michigan, 90 miles south of the Straits and 3 hours north of Detroit, and it sat on the Ausable River, in the middle of a pine forest that had once been the biggest lumber operation in the state and was now mostly a place people drove through on the way somewhere else. The town had a main street 4 blocks long. It had a diner, a hardware store, a small grocery, a bar called Spike's, a Methodist church, a Catholic church and a Baptist church, and a shelter on Peninsular Avenue that took men under 20 and had, until 3 weeks ago, taken Rowan. The shelter rule was clear. 20 was the age you had to be out. The director, a soft-spoken man named Neil who ran the place from a small office off the main dormitory, had told Rowan a month ahead of his birthday. Neil had helped him look for work. Neil had helped him look for another place. There had not been another place. Grayling was a town of 1,700 people, and it had one shelter, and the shelter had one rule. Rowan had turned 20 on a Tuesday in December. On Wednesday morning, Neil had walked him to the front door and had shaken his hand and had said, "Come back and see me sometimes." Then Rowan had walked out into an inch of snow with a duffel bag and a paperback book about the migration patterns of Canada geese and $11. He had been on the street for 3 weeks. Grayling in January was cold in the specific way of northern Michigan. Not a wet cold, but a dry, hard cold that got into your bones and stayed there. Rowan had spent the first 4 nights walking. He had walked to the 24-hour laundromat and had sat inside pretending to wait for a load until the manager had asked him to leave at 3 a.m. He had walked to the truck stop out by the interstate and had bought a coffee for $2 and had sat with it for as long as he could make it last. He had walked the highway shoulder from midnight to 5 in the morning because walking kept him warm and standing still did not. On the 5th day, he had found the car. It was a 1996 Chevrolet Caprice that somebody had abandoned in the small gravel lot behind Miller's Hardware on Michigan Avenue. The passenger window had been broken out and taped over with a sheet of plastic. The interior was cold but dry. Rowan had checked the doors on a Sunday morning and had found the driver's side unlocked. He had slept in the front seat under his winter coat and a wool blanket he had gotten from the shelter on his way out. He had slept in that car for 2.5 weeks. He worked at Ruby's Family Diner on Michigan Avenue, 4 blocks from the car. He worked the dish pit from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, 5 days a week, at $11 an hour, which came to $220 a week before taxes. Ruby, whose name was actually Marlene, but whose grandmother had been Ruby, and who kept the name because it was on the sign, was a woman in her 60s who had known everyone in Grayling for 40 years. She had hired Rowan on the 2nd day he had come in asking, and she had never asked him where he lived. And she had let him eat 1 full meal a shift on the house, and she had let him wash up in the employee bathroom and stand in front of the hand dryer to warm his hands on cold mornings. Ruby was, at that point, the closest thing Rowan had to a friend. Rowan had aged out of foster care 2 years earlier, in a group home in Cadillac, 40 miles south. The state had given him a $600 stipend and a bus ticket and a folder with a resume template inside it. He had used the $600 in about 6 weeks. He had used the bus ticket immediately. He had been on his own since. He had a brother somewhere. Marcus was 3 years older. They had been placed together twice and then separated. And then Marcus had aged out first and had told Rowan he would come back for him. And he had not. Rowan did not blame Marcus. He understood, in the way you understand something you have lived, that when you finally got out, sometimes you did not come back. Marcus was somewhere. Rowan hoped he was okay. He did not have a mother, he remembered. She had left when he was 2. His father had been in prison and was still there, 13 years into a 15-year sentence for something Rowan did not ask about anymore. He had cousins he had never met. That was his family. He kept the $11 in an envelope in his duffel bag, along with the paperback about the geese, a photograph of himself and Marcus from a foster placement in 2015, and a small carved wooden bird his last foster mother had given him when he had moved out. Her name had been Verna. She had been 81 years old. She had died 6 months after Rowan left her house. He had not known she was dying when he left. She had not told him. He had learned it from a caseworker 3 months later. Verna had told him one thing he remembered. She had told him that the world was full of small doors, and that most people walked past them, and that the trick was to notice when one was open and to go through it. Rowan had thought about that a lot over the last 2 years. He had not been sure yet how to tell an open door from a closed one, but he had kept looking. The library was warm and did not charge admission, so that was where he spent his afternoons on days he was not at the diner. He read whatever was on the returns cart. Books about lighthouses, books about the Depression, books about how to fix a lawnmower. He read the local paper, the Crawford County Avalanche, front to back, on a Tuesday in the first week of January. On the back page of the Avalanche, under a small headline that said, County Tax Auction, Properties, he found a list of parcels. There were 14 properties on the list. Most of them were vacant lots or farmhouses in bad shape. One of them was a 3-bedroom trailer that had been condemned. One was a hunting cabin. 2 were small commercial properties in downtown Grayling. The last one on the list was parcel 22-114, address 1608 North Michigan Avenue. Description: Northern Pines Bowl, 8-lane bowling alley, and adjacent parking lot. Structure built 1962, closed since owner's death 2019. Building condition fair to poor, minimum bid $10. The auction was Thursday. Rowan sat with the newspaper in the library for a long time. He knew the building. He had walked past it 100 times. It sat at the north end of Michigan Avenue, past the last of the storefronts, on the edge of the pine woods that ran up to the golf course. A low, flat, rectangular building with a long, faded sign along the roofline that said Northern Pines Bowl in red letters against a cream background. The parking lot was a small one, gravel and cracked asphalt. The windows had been boarded up since before Rowan had moved to Grayling. Rowan had walked past it, and he had thought one time that a place like that must have been full of light on a Saturday night when he had been 8 years old and living at the group home. He had never bowled. He knew what bowling was. He had seen it on television. He had never been. A bowling alley for $10. He thought about the car behind the hardware store. He thought about the wool blanket. He thought about the temperature at 3 a.m. last night, which had been 15 degrees below zero. He thought about Verna and the small doors. He got up. He walked to the county clerk's office. He asked the woman at the counter what one did to bid at the county tax auction. She explained. She gave him a small form. He filled it out. She asked him if he had questions. He said no. He walked back to the library. The auction was at 10 in the morning on Thursday in the annex behind the courthouse. Rowan got there at 9:30. He had put on his cleanest jeans and the newer of his 2 flannel shirts. He had shaved in the diner's employee bathroom. He had eaten Ruby's usual breakfast for him: 2 eggs, hash browns, toast. Ruby had given him a styrofoam cup of coffee to take with him. "Where are you going all dressed up?" she had said. "County auction," Rowan had said. Ruby had looked at him a long moment. She had not asked why. "Good luck," she had said. The annex was warm and smelled of wet wool. 22 people sat on folding metal chairs. Most of them were men, older, in Carhartt jackets, who looked to Rowan like people who bought properties at auctions regularly. Rowan sat in the back row and drank his coffee and waited. The auctioneer was a man in a brown suit who spoke fast and flat. He worked through the first 13 properties in 40 minutes. The 3-bedroom trailer went for $400. The hunting cabin went for $1,000. A vacant lot near the school went for $250. The men in Carhartt jackets bought most of them. "Parcel 22-114, the auctioneer said. Northern Pines Bowl on North Michigan Avenue. 8-lane bowling alley, closed since 2019. Condition, fair to poor. This property has been listed at 3 previous auctions with no bids. We're opening at $10. Do I hear 10? Nobody moved. The auctioneer looked around the room. He was a Crawford County man, and he had run this auction for 11 years, and he had, Owen could tell, expected this exact outcome for the 4th time. $10, folks, come on now, $10. A man in the second row snorted. $10 is too much for that place, Doug, he said. Should be paying us to take it. A few people laughed. Rowan raised his hand. The auctioneer paused. He looked at Rowan. Rowan could not read his expression. "I've got $10 from the young man in the back." He scanned the room out of habit. "Do I hear 20? Silence. Going once, going twice. Sold. Northern Pines Bowl to the young man in the back for $10. He shook his head as he wrote it down. 2 of the men in the front row turned to look at Rowan. One of them was smiling. "Son," the smiling man said over his shoulder, "you just bought yourself a lifetime of problems." Rowan did not answer. He walked up to the clerk's window. He paid in a 5 and 5 ones. The clerk, a woman he had never met named Lorraine, wrote him out a receipt and slid a paper deed across the counter, along with a single small key on a wire loop. "You're not from around here," Lorraine said. "I've been here about 3 years. Where are you from originally?" "Cadillac." She looked at him a long moment. "You know that building's been closed 6 years." "Yes, ma'am." "Roof's got a hole in the back corner. Boiler's shot. Electric's been off since 20. "Yes, ma'am." She held the key for another second before she let go of it. "Good luck, honey." Rowan walked out of the annex with a deed to a bowling alley in his pocket and a key in his fist. He walked the 6 blocks to Michigan Avenue. He walked to the north end of the street, past Miller's Hardware, where the Caprice was still parked in the lot, past the last of the storefronts, out to the edge of the woods. Northern Pines Bowl sat under a gray January sky. The sign along the roofline had faded to a pale pink where the red letters had once been. The parking lot had 8 inches of unbroken snow on it. The plywood over the windows had gone gray with weather. A small side door on the east side of the building had a rusted padlock hanging from it. The main entrance was a set of double glass doors, both of them boarded from the inside. Rowan walked around the perimeter of the building once. He noticed things. He noticed that the roof, from what he could see, had one visibly bad spot at the northwest corner where the shingles had blown off. He noticed that the outer walls, which were painted cinder block, were solid, no cracks, no rot. He noticed that the parking lot lights were still standing, though he did not know if they still worked. He noticed that the sign, faded as it was still straight and true from a metal frame the builder had put deep into the ground. He came around to the side door with the padlock. He fit the small key into the padlock. It turned. He unhooked the padlock. He pushed the door. It opened into darkness and the smell of a building that had sat closed for 6 years. The smell was mostly dust and old wood, and underneath, the faint sweetness of Maple Lane oil that had never fully evaporated. Rowan stood in the doorway for a moment, letting his eyes adjust. Then he stepped inside. He was in a small back hallway. To his right, a door led to what he could tell in the dim light was a small office. To his left, another door led to a larger space he could not yet see clearly. He went left. The larger door opened into the main hall of the bowling alley. It was bigger than Rowan had expected. The ceiling was 15 feet high, with acoustic tiles that had gone yellow with age. Along the near wall, a long counter ran 40 feet, a shoe rental counter, with a peg wall behind it still holding rows of bowling shoes in various sizes, all of them dusty. Beyond the counter, 8 lanes stretched away into the deep interior of the building. Above each lane, a scoring table sat idle. At the far end of the room, the pin decks were still set up, with all 10 pins standing in each lane, as if the last game had ended 50 years ago, and no one had ever come back to clear them. The maple wood of the lanes was the color of old honey in the dim light, coming through gaps in the plywood over the front windows. Rowan stood at the shoe counter and looked down the lanes. He was 20 years old. He had $10 less than he had when he woke up that morning. He owned a building that had been closed since he was 14. He did not know the first thing about bowling alleys. He put his hands flat on the shoe counter. The counter was solid. He walked down the length of the building along the side of the lanes, running his hand along the low wooden rail that separated the seating from the lanes. The rail was solid. The maple boards of the lanes were dusty but sound. Somewhere near lane 3, he noticed his hand catch on a small ridge in the rail, a place where the wood had been repaired at some point in decades past, cleanly and skillfully. Whoever had built this building had to last. He walked to the back of the alley. Behind the pin decks was a long service corridor that ran the width of the building. In the corridor, the pin-setting machinery, 8 big mechanical assemblies with gears and belts and drop arms, all of them coated in a fine dust. At the far end of the corridor, another door led to what turned out to be a large open room with a wet bar in one corner and a small kitchen. This had been once the bowling alley's snack bar. There were still a few glass mugs on a shelf behind the bar. A hand-lettered chalkboard on the wall still read, in faded chalk, "Today's special. Harold's famous fries and Pepsi, $3. Rowan stopped at the chalkboard. Harold Vasek owned this building. Rowan had read the parcel description twice at the library. Harold had run it until his death in 2019. The county had taken it. The county had tried to sell it 3 times. Nobody had wanted it. Nobody had wanted a bowling alley in a town that had shrunk by 6,000 people over 50 years. Rowan had wanted it because it had a roof. He went back to the small office at the front. The office had a wooden desk, a swivel chair with a broken back, a filing cabinet, and a small bathroom with a sink and a toilet. There was a battery-powered emergency light mounted above the office door that Rowan tested and found still worked faintly. There was, he discovered when he checked, running water at the sink. The water ran rust-brown for 2 minutes and then cleared. The county had apparently kept the water on for building maintenance reasons. There was no heat. The electric was off. The gas was off. But there was water and a bathroom and a locked door and a roof. Rowan walked back out to the Caprice behind the hardware store. He got his duffel bag and his blanket. He walked them back to Northern Pines Bowl. He set them on the office floor. He sat down in the swivel chair with the broken back. It was 1:30 in the afternoon, on the day he had bought a bowling alley for $10. It was 15 degrees outside. He had 6 hours until dark, and he did not know what he was going to do first. He decided to sleep first. He had not slept well in 3 weeks. He unrolled the blanket on the office floor. He lay down. He fell asleep in 5 minutes. He slept for 9 hours. He woke up at 10:30 that night in a completely dark building. He was warmer than he had been in 3 weeks. Bowling alleys, he learned that night, were surprisingly good at keeping the January cold out, even without heat, because they had been built with thick masonry walls and a low ceiling for acoustic reasons. The temperature inside the building was about 48 degrees. Outside it was closer to 0. 48 degrees was a temperature you could survive. He wrapped himself in his blanket and put on his coat and walked back to the Caprice at 11 p.m. and got the rest of his things. A small camp stove Ruby had given him from her attic, a canister of fuel, a change of clothes, and the plastic tarp he had been using to line the floor of the car. He brought them all back to the office of Northern Pines Bowl and made himself a small camp. He slept there for the first 3 nights. He worked at the diner. He walked to the diner in the morning, worked his 8-hour shift, ate his 1-shift meal, and walked back to the bowling alley in the afternoon. He did not tell Ruby that he had bought a bowling alley. He did not tell her because he did not have the words to explain it yet. He spent the afternoons cleaning. He started with the office. He swept the floors. He wiped down the desk and the filing cabinet. He scrubbed the small bathroom. He got the water running clear through both the sink and the toilet. He carried out 3 trash bags of debris, old paperwork, empty bottles, a moth-eaten sweater that had been left on the back of the swivel chair by, Rowan assumed, Harold Vasek in October of 2019. On the 4th day, he opened the filing cabinet. The top drawer held 6 years of paid invoices, utility bills, property tax records, order slips from the pin-setting machine service company, old menus from the snack bar. Every piece of paper was neatly organized. Harold Vasek had run a tight administrative ship until the very end. The second drawer held Harold's tax returns going back to 1995. Rowan flipped through them. Northern Pines Bowl had, in most years, made just enough money to cover its expenses and pay Harold a small salary. Some years it had made a little more. Some years, a little less. Harold had run the business for 45 years by that point, after his wife Judith had died in 1974, according to a small note on one of the earliest returns that mentioned her passing. The third drawer held photographs. Rowan spent an hour with the photographs. They were loose, no albums, just stacks of prints, mostly black and white in the older ones, color in the newer ones. Harold Vasek at various ages, standing in front of Northern Pines Bowl. Harold as a young man in 1962, next to the sign the day it was first illuminated. Harold with a group of bowlers in matching shirts, some kind of league champions. Harold at 50, at 60, at 70, at 80, always in front of the same building. There were also photographs of a woman in her 20s in the earlier ones, smiling, sometimes standing at the shoe counter, sometimes bowling. Judith. There were a few dozen photographs of her. In the last one Rowan could find of her, she looked heavier and slower, and Rowan understood that she was pregnant. The photograph was labeled on the back in Harold's handwriting. Judith and Wesley, spring 1974. Rowan understood that Wesley was inside her at the time of the photograph. He put the photographs back. He kept cleaning. On the 8th day, Ruby caught him. She had gotten curious. She had asked around. Lorraine at the county clerk's office had told her. Ruby came down to the bowling alley on a Sunday afternoon when Rowan was there scrubbing the shoe rental counter with a bucket of soapy water. She let herself in through the side door, which he had left unlocked because he was in and out getting water. Rowan. He turned. Ruby was standing in the doorway of the shoe counter area, her hands on her hips. She was wearing her diner apron and her outdoor coat over it. Ruby, you bought this place. I did. Where are you sleeping? In the office. She looked at him for a long moment. That was smart, she said finally, and it was stupid, but mostly it was smart. She walked over to the shoe counter and looked at the peg wall. You know how to run a bowling alley? No. You know anyone who know. You have any money? I have about $200 in my next paycheck. And what are you going to do with this place? I'm going to fix the roof first. Then I'm going to figure out the electric. Then I'm going to figure out everything else. Ruby looked at him a long moment. My cousin Terry does roofing, she said. He owes me a favor. I'm going to send him down here Wednesday morning to look at that roof. Don't argue. Ruby. Argue. He did not argue. Terry came Wednesday morning. Terry looked at the roof for 40 minutes and told Rowan the damage was one panel section, about 12 square feet, and that he could patch it in an afternoon. He asked what Rowan could pay. Rowan said $60. Terry said, make it 40 and buy me lunch and we're square. Terry patched the roof on Friday. Rowan bought him lunch at Ruby's. Ruby did not charge him for the lunch and did not tell either of the men. By the second week, Rowan had a dry building, a working office bathroom, and a slowly growing sense that the building he was living in was more solid than he had realized. He also had, from 3 days of studying Harold's paperwork, a rough sense of what a bowling alley in Grayling had cost to run in 2019. The answer was not that much. Property taxes, utilities, the pin setter service contract, small supplies. Harold had done all the labor himself. Harold had not paid himself a large salary. The building had been paid off since 1988. If Rowan could get the electric turned on, the pin setters running, and a supply of pins and bowling balls back in the building, the operating cost of running Northern Pines Bowl was less than $2,000 a month. Rowan did not have $2,000 a month. He had zero. But he could see, for the first time in his life, the shape of a thing that was not impossible. On the 14th night since he had bought the building, Rowan noticed something about Lane 3. He had been sweeping the deep floor at the pin end of the lanes at 9 p.m. by the light of his battery-powered lantern. He had swept lanes 1 and 2 without incident. When he had started on Lane 3, he had felt a slight give underfoot at about the 8-foot mark from the pin deck. He crouched down. He set the lantern on the floor. He ran his hand along the maple boards. There was a low spot in the lane surface. It was subtle. Not a break. Not a warp. A slight depression, maybe 1/8 of an inch, running across 4 of the maple boards for a length of about 2 feet. If you had bowled a ball down this lane, it would have drifted very slightly to the right as it passed over the low spot. Rowan sat back on his heels. Old bowling alleys settled. Concrete foundations shifted. Maple boards adjusted over decades. 1/8 of an inch of drift on a lane that was 60 years old was probably not remarkable to anyone but a bowler. Rowan was not a bowler, but he had been reading Harold's records for 2 weeks. Harold had been a meticulous man. Harold had noted the smallest thing. Rowan went back to the office. He opened the filing cabinet. He pulled the maintenance folder for Lane 3 and thumbed through it. Harold had resurfaced Lane 3 in 1978. He had resurfaced it again in 1993. He had resurfaced it again in 2008, 3 times in 45 years. That was normal for a bowling lane in heavy use. But in the maintenance notes for the 1978 resurfacing, Harold had written, in his small, neat handwriting, "Lane 3 has a low spot at approximately 8 feet. It has been there since the building was constructed. It cannot be leveled. I have resurfaced the top and left the low spot alone. This is intentional. Jay would not want it changed." Jay was Judith. Rowan sat on the floor of the office and read that note for a long time. Then he stood up. He walked back to Lane 3. He looked at the low spot. The low spot had been intentional. The low spot had been there since 1962, when the building had been constructed. Harold had known about it. Harold had refused to level it 3 separate times over 45 years because his dead wife would not have wanted him to. There was something under Lane 3. If you have made it this far into Rowan's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I have been waiting to tell you. Because on the 15th night, Rowan Sykes took a sawzall he had borrowed from Terry the roofer and cut through the maple boards of Lane 3 at the 8-foot mark. He worked for 2 hours by the light of his lantern, with the building silent around him. He pulled up a section of maple boards, 4 feet long and 2 feet wide. Underneath the maple was a layer of plywood subfloor. He cut through the plywood. Underneath the plywood was a layer of concrete. The concrete was newer than the surrounding foundation. It had been poured in a rough rectangle about 3 feet long, 1 foot wide. The rest of the foundation around it was original, 1962 concrete, gray and pitted. This rectangle was smoother, cleaner, and had a slight lip around the edges where it met the original pour. Somebody had cut open the original concrete slab and had poured a small patch to cover something. Rowan looked at the patch for a long time. He walked back to the office. He got the rented rotary hammer. He had put a deposit on at Miller's Hardware 3 days earlier. 60 of the $200 in his last diner paycheck. He fitted a chisel bit. He walked back to the Lane 3 opening. He hammered through the concrete patch. It took an hour and 20 minutes. The concrete was 5 inches thick. When he finally broke through and cleared out the pieces, he was looking down into a small rectangular void in the foundation. Sitting in the void was a steel floor safe. It was the size of a small microwave. It was painted dark gray. It had a single combination dial on the front. It sat perfectly level in the void, with 2 inches of clearance on all sides. Rowan sat back on his heels and looked at it. Then he laughed, not loud, a small, quiet laugh, because he had been living in a bowling alley for 2 weeks, and now there was a safe in the floor, and he did not know the combination, and had once again less idea than he had ever had of what he was actually doing. He took a photograph of the safe with the disposable film camera he had bought at the drugstore. He documented the location. Then he lifted the safe out of the void. It was heavier than it looked. He carried it with both arms back to the office. He set it on the desk. He looked at it for a long time. Then he went back through the filing cabinet. He had gotten through the paid invoices and the tax returns and the photographs. He had not opened the 4th drawer. He had thought the 4th drawer was empty because it had felt very light when he had checked it briefly on his first day. The 4th drawer was not empty. The 4th drawer had, sitting at the very bottom, a single leather-bound journal. Rowan lifted it out. The leather was soft from years of handling. The journal was tied closed with a strip of leather cord. He slid the cord off. He opened it to the first page. The handwriting was Harold's. The first entry was dated May 12th, 1962. Open the doors today. Judith and I stood at the shoe counter for the first hour, and nobody came in. Then Roger Hollingsworth came in with his 3 sons. Roger paid for 4 lanes for 2 hours and gave Judith a $5 bill as a tip because he said we had put something new in the town and it deserved to be paid for. I told him we couldn't take the tip. He said we could. Judith cried after they left. She said she was crying because now it was real. Rowan turned the page. The journal was a running record. Harold had written in it almost every week for 57 years. Most entries were short: the weather, the lane traffic, the scores of certain regular bowlers. But every few pages, Harold had written longer entries, personal ones, entries that Harold had clearly written for himself and no one else. Rowan skipped ahead. He turned pages until he came to the fall of 1974. October 8th, 1974. Judith died 6 weeks ago. Wesley died 3 weeks after. I have kept the alley open through both. I did not know what else to do. The regulars have been kind. Roger Hollingsworth's boys came in yesterday and paid for 2 lanes and did not talk much and let me sit at the counter without asking me how I was. That was a mercy. I do not want to talk about how I am. Judith is buried in the town cemetery. Wesley is buried beside her. I bought a double plot before Judith went in because I knew there would need to be room for the child. I did not know then that the child would not live long enough to grow up. I am glad I bought the double plot. They are together. I have been putting money in the safe every week. I started this the 2nd month after we opened, before Judith got sick. I put $100 in every week from what we took at the counter. Nobody knows about the safe, only me. I put it under lane 3 because lane 3 is the lane Judith bowled on the first day I ever met her, in 1959, at the old alley over in Roscommon that closed in 1970. I asked the man who poured our floor to cut me a rectangle in the slab under lane 3 and to leave it for me to fill later. He did not ask why. He was a good man. He is dead now, too. The money is for keeping this place open. Judith made me promise before Wesley was born that if anything happened to her, I would keep the alley open. She said it was the best thing we had ever built, and she did not want it to close. I promised her. She died before the baby was even here, but I have kept my promise. I will keep putting money in the safe every week for the rest of my life. When I am gone, whoever comes after me will find the safe, and they will find the money, and they will keep the doors open. That is my promise back to her. That is what I am doing with the rest of my life. Rowan stopped. He read the entry again. Then he read it a 3rd time. His hands were shaking a little. He turned the pages. He skipped ahead by decades. He wanted to see if Harold had continued. Harold had continued. Every year Harold had written a summary entry that noted how much money he had put in the safe that year. Some years it was $5,000. Some years it was $1,500. Some years, when the alley had a bad season, it was $500. Harold had never missed a year. Rowan added the numbers in his head as he flipped through the pages. He lost count around 1998. He kept going. The last entry in the journal was dated May 15th, 2019, 3 weeks before Harold's death of a stroke in the office chair Rowan now used. I am 82 years old. I do not have much time left. The doctor in Travers told me last month that my heart is not going to hold much longer. I have been putting money in the safe for 45 years since Judith went. There is $47,000 in the safe now. I have counted it 3 times this month to be sure. I never had anyone to leave it to. Judith and I did not have other children. My brother Frank died in 1991. His son moved to Arizona, and I have not spoken to him in 20 years. There is no will worth writing, because there is no one to leave the building to. The bank will take it for taxes after I am gone. The county will find the safe eventually if they tear the building down. The money will go to the state. There is nothing I can do about that now. If somebody finds this after I'm gone, and I hope somebody does, I want them to know what the money is. It is not just money. It is my promise to my wife. It is 45 years of putting $100 a week in a safe under lane 3 because I could not save Judith, and I could not save Wesley, but I could keep this one thing alive that Judith loved. If you can keep the doors open, use it to keep the doors open. If you cannot, use it to build a life. Judith would have wanted that too. She loved this building because it was full of people. She would have loved anyone who kept it full. Whoever you are, thank you. I do not know you. I hope you are kind. I hope you are not alone the way I have been alone. Judith, this is what I did with the rest of it. I hope you would think it was enough. Rowan closed the journal. He sat at Harold's desk in the small office of Northern Pines Bowl at 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning in late January of 2025, with a leather journal in his lap and a locked steel safe on the desk in front of him. He was 20 years old. He had aged out of foster care 2 years ago. He had $11 in an envelope in his duffel bag when he had bought this building. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. He did not know the combination to the safe, but Harold had made a note somewhere. Harold made notes for everything. It would be in the journal or in the filing cabinet or written on a piece of paper Harold had tucked somewhere obvious. Rowan turned back to the front of the journal. He flipped through the first entry pages. On the inside back cover of the journal, on the leather itself, in Harold's small handwriting, 3 numbers had been written in blue ink, 05-08-59, May 8th, 1959, the day Harold had met Judith at the bowling alley in Roscommon. Rowan tried the combination, right 5, left 8, right 59. The dial clicked. A handle turned. The safe opened. Inside was cash, stacks of bills bound with rubber bands. Mostly hundreds and fifties, some tens. A few older bills with faces on them Rowan did not recognize as immediately. The way bills from the 1970s and 1980s could look. Rowan counted the stacks with his eyes. He counted 47 of them, roughly the size of $1,000 each. $47,000 in a floor safe under a bowling alley in a small Michigan town. Rowan closed the safe. He put his hands flat on the desk. He sat in the office chair. He looked at the safe and the journal in front of him. He did not know what to do first. He knew that Verna had told him to notice when the small doors were open. He understood. At 2:14 a.m. in the office of a bowling alley he had bought for $10 that a very large door had just opened. And he understood that he had a choice about what he was going to do next. He could take the money and disappear. He could pay first and last month's rent on an apartment in Traverse City. He could buy a car. He could enroll in community college. He could build a normal life for himself, and no one would ever fault him for it. Or he could keep the doors open. He sat with that choice for 2 hours. At 4:15 a.m., he wrote in the back of Harold's journal, on the first blank page, in his own handwriting, "My name is Rowan Sykes. I am 20 years old. I aged out of foster care 2 years ago. I bought this building for $10 last week because I had nowhere to sleep. I found the safe tonight. I read your journal. I'm going to try to keep the doors open. I do not know how to run a bowling alley, but I have 3 months of your journal to read, and I have your notes, and I have your money. I hope I do not let you down. Thank you, Harold. I do not know you either, but I know you now." He closed the journal. He put it in the desk drawer. He put the safe on the floor of the office. He locked the office door. He walked out into the main hall of Northern Pines Bowl. He looked down the 8 lanes in the dim light of his lantern. Then he unrolled his blanket on the office floor and slept for 4 hours. He told Ruby the next morning at the diner. He sat at the counter after his shift. He told her quietly about the safe and the money and the journal. Ruby listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Harold Vask was a good man," she said finally. "I bowled leagues at Northern Pines when I was a girl. My mother knew Judith. Everybody knew Judith. She was the friendliest person in Grayling in 1974. Everyone in this town mourned her. And then everyone forgot, because that is what a town does over 50 years. She looked at Rowan. "You are going to reopen it." "I am going to try." "Do you know how much work that is?" "No." "Then you are lucky, because if you knew, you would not do it." She stood up and refilled her coffee. "I know a woman you should talk to," she said. "Her name is Meredith Pauley. She's an attorney, retired. Grew up in Grayling, bowled at Northern Pines as a kid. Harold let her join the youth league in '66 when her family could not afford the fee. She has never forgotten that. She retired back to Grayling 5 years ago. She takes cases she cares about. She does not charge. She will care about this. I will call her this afternoon." "Ruby, why are you helping me?" Ruby set her coffee down. "Because Verna was a good woman." Rowan looked up sharply. "You knew Verna." "Rowan, you told me your last foster mother's name was Verna Kolanowski. There is one Verna in Crawford County I have ever known. She was my Sunday school teacher in 1972. She was the kindest person I ever met. When I heard her name from you last spring, I knew who you were and where you had come from before I knew what you had done since." Ruby put her hand on his shoulder. "I've been waiting for you to need something so I could help. You have taken a long time to ask." Rowan did not say anything for a while. Ruby refilled his water glass. "Come back for dinner tonight," she said. "I'll make you eat something better than dish pit toast." Meredith Pauley came to Northern Pines Bowl the next afternoon. She was 71, small, gray-haired, sharp-eyed. She wore corduroy pants and a wool sweater and hiking boots. She walked around the outside of the building slowly. She walked through the interior with Rowan, slower still. She stopped at lane 3 and looked at the open floor. She stopped at the shoe counter and put both her hands on it. She stopped at the office and looked at the safe. "I bowled my first strike on lane 3 when I was 13 years old," she said quietly. "Harold rang the little brass bell over the counter and gave me a free root beer. I have not been in this building in 50 years. I did not know until I walked in today how much I have missed it." She turned to Rowan. "Tell me everything." Rowan told her. She listened. She asked good questions. When Rowan mentioned that a developer named Hollis Trask had already come to the diner looking for him and had left a business card offering to buy the building for $60,000 cash, Meredith's face got very still. "Trask has been trying to buy this lot for 3 years, she said. "He wants to build a Dollar General on it. He has been telling the county council that the building is a blight. He's going to escalate now that you have won the auction. He is going to try to find code violations. He is going to try to argue your ownership is legally void because you were homeless when you bid. He is going to call the health department. He is going to call the building inspector. He is going to make your life difficult until you sell to him." Can he do that? He can try. He is going to fail, but he can try. She sat down on the shoe counter bench. "Rowan, I am going to take your case. I am not going to charge you. I am going to be your attorney until this building is reopened and stable and Hollis Trask has moved on to some other town's building. Do you accept that?" "I accept." "Good. Now, let's talk about how you actually reopen a bowling alley." They talked for 4 hours. Meredith wrote a list. The list ran to 3 pages. everything Rowan needed to do to get Northern Pines Bowl open again, in the order it needed to happen. Restore the electric. Contact the pin setting machine service company. Order new house balls and pins. Get the boiler serviced. Get the health department to sign off on the snack bar in the bathrooms. Register the business. Get insurance. Hire 2 employees. At the bottom of the list, she wrote, "Don't do any of this alone. Ask for help. This town owes Harold and Judith, and it will help you if you ask," Rowan asked. The word spread through Grayling faster than he expected. Ruby told the diner. Meredith told the Methodist church. Terry the roofer told the men at Miller's Hardware. Lorraine at the county clerk's office told her Wednesday night bridge club. By the second week of February, 7 people had walked into Northern Pines Bowl offering to help. A retired electrician named Kurt agreed to redo the wiring for the cost of parts. A woman named Elaine, who had been a bookkeeper for 40 years, agreed to help Rowan set up the business paperwork. Terry brought his brother Denny, who did HVAC, to look at the boiler. Denny got it running on a Wednesday afternoon and did not charge for the labor. Rowan paid for the parts out of Harold's safe money. He paid Terry and Denny and Kurt when they would let him, and gave them lunch or dinner at Ruby's when they would not. Hollis Trask came to the building 3 times in February. The first time he came in a black Suburban with a driver. He knocked on the side door. Rowan let him in. Trask offered $80,000. Rowan said no. Trask said the health department was going to be visiting soon, and there would be problems. Rowan said okay. Trask left. The second time Trask came with a lawyer. The lawyer handed Rowan an envelope. The envelope contained a demand letter alleging that Rowan's ownership was legally void because a person of no fixed address could not legally hold real property under a specific Michigan statute the lawyer cited. Rowan called Meredith. Meredith read the letter and called Trask's lawyer directly. Meredith explained, in a phone call that lasted 11 minutes, why the statute did not apply and why filing a suit on it would embarrass the firm. The letter was withdrawn the next day. The third time, Trask came alone. He came at night. He knocked on the office door. Rowan opened it. "Kid," Trask said, "I'm going to tell you something because I think you're too young to know it. You are going to fail. This building is going to close within a year. When it does, I will still be here. I will still want the lot. I will not pay you what I'm offering now. I will pay you what the bank pays. Take my offer and walk away with something. Or don't and walk away with nothing." Rowan looked at him. "I already walked in here with nothing," Rowan said. "I don't know what you think I'm afraid of." Trask stared at him. Then Trask left. He did not come back. The town restoration of Northern Pines Bowl took 11 weeks. By late April, the electric was on. The boiler was working. The pin setters had been serviced by the company Harold had used for 40 years, whose owner had cried in the middle of the servicing, and had told Rowan that Harold had been the best customer he had ever had. The snack bar had passed inspection. The insurance was in place. The business was registered. New pins had been ordered. New house balls had been ordered. New rental shoes had been ordered. A small painted sign had been hung by the front door that said, "Welcome to Northern Pines Bowl under new management." Rowan had not touched Harold's original sign along the roofline. He had cleaned it. He had left the paint faded. It said what it had said in 1962, and it said what it said now. Northern Pines Bowl reopened on the Saturday of Memorial Day weekend, 2025. The line at the shoe counter that first afternoon ran 20 deep. Ruby was working the counter with Rowan, because Rowan had asked her, and Ruby had told the diner they were closing early because she had a family thing. Meredith was working the snack bar. Terry and Denny were running the pin setters. Elaine was managing the money at the register. The first person Rowan handed a pair of rental shoes to was a boy about 11 years old. He was wearing a jacket that was too big for him and jeans with worn knees. He was standing beside a woman in her 40s whose sweater had a name tag on it that said Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. The boy did not look up at Rowan when he took the shoes. The woman said, "This is his first time bowling. I don't have the sign-up form yet for the youth league you are starting." "I have it in the office," Rowan said. "I'll bring it out." He looked at the boy again. The boy was watching him now with the specific, careful watching of a kid who had learned not to expect much from anyone. Rowan knew that look. "What's your name?" Rowan asked him. Bram. "My name is Rowan. I run this place now." "Okay. You know how much a game of bowling costs here?" "No. For you, right now, this weekend and any weekend after, nothing. Free. As many games as you want. Shoes free, too." The caseworker's face changed. "Sir, we can pay." "There's a fund." "I know. Keep it for something else." Rowan handed Bram the shoes. "Lane 3, Rowan said. "There's a little bit of a low spot in the middle. Your ball is going to drift a tiny bit right. Aim about half an inch left of where you want it to go." Bram looked at him. "Why do you know that?" "Because the man who built this place a long time ago made the low spot on purpose. Because his wife bowled on lane 3 the first day he ever met her. He never fixed it because he did not want to change the thing she loved." Bram was quiet. "Is his wife still here?" "She died a long time ago, but he ran this bowling alley for 45 more years after she did, because he had promised her he would keep it open." Bram considered that. He looked down at the shoes in his hands. Then he looked at lane 3. "Okay," he said. He walked with his caseworker to lane 3, watched from the shoe counter as Bram put on the rental shoes. He watched him pick out a house ball from the rack. He watched him step up to the line for the first frame. He watched Bram roll the ball down lane 3. The ball drifted a tiny bit right. It hit 6 pins. Bram turned and looked back at Rowan. He was almost smiling. Rowan almost smiled back. Ruby, standing beside Rowan at the counter, put her hand on his shoulder. "You did it," she said. "I don't know what I did." "You kept the doors open." Rowan did not answer. He watched Bram bowl his second frame. This time the boy adjusted his aim by half an inch, the way Rowan had told him. The ball drifted the tiny bit right and hit the head pin square. 9 pins fell. Bram whooped. Rowan reached over and rang the small brass bell that hung over the shoe counter. The bell Harold had rung for Meredith Pauley in 1966, when she had bowled her first strike. The bell that Harold had rung for every kid's first strike for 57 years. The whole alley looked up. Rowan stood behind the shoe counter of a bowling alley he had bought for $10 in a town he had come to with nothing. On the opening night of a business, he had learned to run from the notes of a dead man who had spent 45 years keeping a promise to a wife who had died before her son could speak. There were about 60 people in the building. Half of them were strangers. Half of them were people who had, over the last 11 weeks, come through the doors and offered to help. He thought about Verna. He thought about the small doors. He thought about Harold, who had walked through a very large door in 1959, when he had met Judith at a bowling alley in Roscommon, and who had spent the rest of his life trying to keep that door open for other people, even though the person who had walked through it with him was gone. Rowan understood standing there that Harold's promise had not died with Harold. Harold's promise had gone into the safe under lane 3 and had waited 6 years for somebody to find it. And now it belonged to Rowan. He was going to keep the doors open. Bram walked back up to the line for his third frame. Rowan watched him bowl. He was 20 years old. He had $10 less than he had woken up with 4 months ago. He had a bowling alley. He had a town. He had a plan. He had a life. He rang the bell again, for no reason, just to hear it. Bram looked back and grinned. Rowan grinned back.